In a strong partnership, you learn to stop thinking in terms of me and start thinking in terms of we. My goals become our goals. Your dreams become our dreams. The two paths merge into a single, shared future. It's a beautiful, essential part of building a life with someone. But there's a danger in that word, we. A danger that happens so gradually, you don't even notice it. It's the danger that, in the process of merging, one person's path doesn't just bend. It vanishes completely. My path vanished, and the future we were building together turned out to be a blueprint for his life, with my own dreams left in the demolition pile. Before Daniel, my life was my work, and I was defined by my passion for it. As an architect at a top-tier firm in Chicago, my world was a symphony of creation. It smelled of coffee and freshly printed blueprints. It sounded like the frantic clicking of keyboards and the low hum of a 3D printer in the model shop. My days were long, fueled by a relentless drive to solve problems, to bend steel and glass and light into something beautiful and functional. I wasn't just earning a living. I was building a legacy. I remember the watershed moment of my early career, the project that put me on the map, a cantilevered pedestrian bridge over the river. Everyone said it couldn't be done on our budget. The engineering was too complex, the materials too expensive. I spent 3 sleepless weeks reworking the structural calculations, inventing a new truss system that was both elegant and cost-effective. I lived in that office. My diet consisted of cold pizza and the adrenaline of a challenge. When the project was approved, and later, when I stood on that finished bridge, feeling the slight, deliberate sway of my design beneath my feet as the city bustled below, the feeling was indescribable. It was pride. It was purpose. It was mine. That was my identity. Then I met Daniel. He was a brilliant financial analyst, and from our first date, he was captivated by my world. He wasn't intimidated by my ambition. He was energized by it. He'd show up at the firm at 10 p.m. with 2 cups of coffee and a goofy grin, ready to be my support staff. He'd sit for hours, patiently holding pieces of foam core together, while I assembled a model, asking intelligent questions about zoning laws and thermal bridging. He celebrated my successes with more enthusiasm than anyone. When I was made the youngest associate partner in the firm's history, he threw me a surprise party and gave a speech about my talent that made me cry. He saw all of me, the driven, work-obsessed architect, and he loved me for it. He felt like the final, essential element of the design. We were a power couple. We were a team of equals, destined to build an empire together. We married 2 years later, our future stretching before us like a grand, open city plan. We were invincible. The first sign that our foundation was unstable came about a year after our wedding. Daniel came home one night, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. He had just come from a final round interview with a massive international private equity firm. It was a long shot, a dream job he never thought he'd actually be in the running for. But they had offered it to him. A senior director position. A life-changing, career-defining leap. I was ecstatic for him, ready to pop the champagne. But then, he delivered the catch. The job wasn't in Chicago. It was in Zurich, Switzerland. The champagne bottle stayed corked. Zurich. The name landed in the room with a dead thud. A beautiful city, a world away. A city where I had no professional network, where the stringent architectural licensing requirements were a notoriously difficult labyrinth, and where I didn't speak a word of the language. It was a city where I, Isabel, the associate partner, would be a nobody. He saw the blood drain from my face and immediately launched the most effective sales pitch of his life. He took my hands, his eyes wide and earnest. "Izzy, listen, this is for us," he began, his voice a low, urgent hum. "This is the move that changes everything. The salary is astronomical. We could pay off our loans in 2 years. We'd be living in Europe. Think of the travel, the culture, the adventure. But my job, Daniel," I whispered. "My life is here. Everything I've built is here." "I know," he said, pulling me closer. And I would never ask you to give that up. Never. Think of this as a strategic pause, a sabbatical. With the money I'll be making, you won't have to work. For the first time, you can breathe. You can finally write that book on minimalist residential design you're always talking about. You could take painting classes, learn a new language. It would only be for a few years, 3, maybe 4, tops. Then we come back, financially secure for life, and you can start your own firm. No investors, no partners, complete creative control. This isn't an ending, Izzy. It's a slingshot. We're pulling back now so we can launch our future, our empire, even further. He was so passionate, so convincing. He made it sound like my sacrifice was actually a gift to myself, an adventure, a sabbatical, a strategic pause. He never once used the words quit your job or give up your career. He framed it as a temporary detour on the path to an even greater shared destination. My friends were horrified. He's asking you to give up everything, Sarah told me over a tense lunch. My boss, a man who had mentored me for a decade, sat me down in his office. Isabel, he said, your name is on the door, here in 5 years, if you stay. Don't throw that away. But I defended our decision with the fierce loyalty of a woman in love. You don't understand, I told them. This is for us. I had so thoroughly bought into the dream he was selling that I had become his co-conspirator. I convinced myself that this was the ultimate act of partnership. My last day at the firm was surreal. Packing up my desk, the photos, the awards, the blueprints of projects that felt like my children, it was an out-of-body experience. At my farewell party, I gave a speech full of false bravado, promising to see everyone in a few years when I returned to start my own legendary company. I think I believed it, even as I said it. The first 6 months in Zurich were intoxicating. The novelty of a new country, a new culture, was a powerful distraction. We found a stunning, minimalist apartment with a view of the lake that looked like a postcard. We spent weekends hiking in the Alps and taking trains to Italy. Daniel was instantly a star at his new job, celebrated and important. I was his elegant, supportive wife, the one hosting immaculate dinner parties for his new colleagues and their partners. I enrolled in an intensive German class and bought a beautiful set of oil paints. I was playing the part of the woman on sabbatical perfectly. But when the novelty wore off and the rhythm of our new life set in, a quiet, creeping dread began to take root. My German was functional, but nowhere near the level of professional fluency needed to navigate the complex world of architecture. The expensive oil paints sat in their box, untouched. The book on minimalism remained a single sentence in a notebook. I discovered a devastating truth. My passion wasn't a switch I could just turn on in my spare time. It was an ecosystem that needed the pressure of deadlines, the stimulation of challenges, and the energy of collaboration. In the sterile quiet of our beautiful apartment, with nothing to do all day but wait for my husband to come home, my creative fire began to die. My life, once so full and self-defined, was now entirely defined by him. My role was to be his soft place to land. I managed our home. I planned our social calendar around his demanding schedule. I was his confidant and cheerleader. And I was, for the first time in my adult life, completely financially dependent on him. The power dynamic in our relationship shifted so slowly I didn't notice until it was a chasm. We were no longer equals. I was a supporting character in the blockbuster movie of his life. The temporary 3 years turned into 4, then 5. The talk of moving back to Chicago became a distant, uncomfortable topic. When I would bring it up, he would dismiss it with a casual, almost pitying air. Why would you want to go back to all that stress, Izzy? He asked me during one tense dinner. Look at the life we have. I'm happy. Aren't you happy? When I tried to explain that I felt aimless, that I missed my work, he just didn't get it. But you don't need to work, he'd say, as if that was the end of the discussion. He no longer saw my career as a vital part of me that was on pause. He saw it as a former life I had been lucky to escape. My sacrifice was no longer a temporary investment in our future. It was simply the new, convenient reality of his. The resentment I felt was a physical thing, a constant, low-grade fever that colored everything in a haze of bitterness. I felt trapped. I had made my bed in this beautiful Swiss prison, and now I had to lie in it. The end, when it came, wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a quiet, clinical demolition. It was a Tuesday. He came home from work late, looking tired. I had spent hours making his favorite meal, coq au vin. He didn't even notice. He walked into the living room, stood by the floor-ceiling window for a long moment, and spoke to his reflection in the glass, not to me. "I'm not happy, Izzy," he said, his voice flat. "I don't think I have been, for a while. We've grown apart." I just stared at the back of his head, a laugh bubbling in my throat, so full of acid it almost choked me. Grown apart. I had given up my entire world to move to his. My life was a tiny, barren island, and his was a sprawling, thriving continent. We hadn't grown apart. He had simply left me behind. "I've met someone," he continued, still not looking at me. "At work. Her name is Katerina. She's a director in the legal department. She understands my life here. The pressures I'm under, the cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was leaving me for a career woman. He was leaving me for a version of myself that I had given up for him. My sacrifice wasn't the foundation of our future. It was the flaw in our design that led to its collapse. He left me in Zurich, alone, in the beautiful apartment that was leased in his name. He left me with a 5-year gap on my resume, a dwindling savings account, and a hollowed-out sense of self. He hadn't just left me, he had dismantled me, brick by brick. The months that followed were a blur of logistics and grief. I was adrift in a foreign country where I had no real friends, no family, and no career. The easiest thing would have been to fly back to Chicago, tail between my legs, a cautionary tale for ambitious women everywhere. But something in me, some deeply buried flicker of the woman I used to be, refused. This city was the scene of my erasure, and I decided, with a ferocity that surprised me, that it had to be the scene of my reclamation. The first step was the most humbling. I sat at my laptop and opened my resume. Staring at the gaping, 5-year hole felt like staring into an abyss. I spent a week just crafting the language to describe my sabbatical, trying to spin my life as a supporting character into something that sounded professional. I started applying for jobs. I sent over 100 applications. I got 3 responses, all polite rejections. The world had moved on. I was a relic. So, I swallowed my pride until it tasted like dust. I started applying for junior positions, internships, anything to get my foot back in the door. I took freelance drafting jobs for next to nothing, working from a tiny, rented room. I spent my nights and weekends studying new building codes, learning new software, catching up on 5 years of architectural innovation. It was grueling. Some nights I would just cry from the sheer exhaustion and humiliation of it all, taking orders on tasks I used to lead. Slowly, painstakingly, brick by brick, I began to rebuild. I got a low-level job at a small, boutique firm. My boss, a woman named Anja, saw past the gap in my resume. She saw the talent and the hunger. I worked twice as hard as anyone else, and my passion, which I thought was dead and buried, roared back to life. My ideas were good. My designs were bold. In the language of structure and form, I remembered who I was. It's been 4 years since Daniel left. I'm still in Zurich. I speak fluent, confident German. Last year, Anja made me a senior partner in our now thriving firm. The other day, I was standing on the rooftop of a new community arts center I designed, looking out over the city. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the light was catching the complex angles of the facade in a way that made my heart ache with a familiar feeling. It wasn't just pride, it was purpose. It was mine. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Daniel was transferred to the Singapore office. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a quiet, profound sense of distance. He isn't a monster. He's just a man who built his dream on top of mine, and then was surprised when the foundation cracked. I lost so much when I agreed to give up my career. But in the end, the journey back to myself, while the hardest thing I've ever done, gave me something he never could have. It gave me a foundation that is truly, unshakably my own. It was built not on the hollow promise of a we, but on the resilient, undeniable strength of me. And it's a structure that I know will never ever fall. The years following my return to architecture were not just about rebuilding. They were about reinvention. The woman who had been left alone in a Zurich apartment was a ghost, a memory. The woman who emerged was Isabel Voss, senior partner at Stadler and Voss. The name had a satisfying weight to it. My old boss, Anja, had recognized my relentless drive and had given me not just a job, but a stake in the company we were building together. Our firm became known for its bold, sustainable designs. We were winning awards. We were making a name for ourselves across Europe. My life was full. It was mine. The foundation I had built for myself was solid, reinforced with the steel of hard-won lessons. Daniel was a closed chapter, a historical footnote in the story of my life. I hadn't seen or spoken to him in nearly 7 years. I knew he had been transferred to Singapore a few years back, a piece of irrelevant trivia I'd heard from a former acquaintance. He was a phantom from another lifetime, and I felt nothing for him but a profound, clinical distance. My peace was absolute. I believed nothing could threaten it. The opportunity of a lifetime arrived on a rainy Tuesday in the form of a request for proposal. Nexus Corp, a global tech behemoth, was building its new European headquarters. It was the most ambitious architectural project on the continent. A €1 billion campus that would define the city's skyline for the next century. Every major firm in the world would be competing for it. For a boutique firm like ours, winning was impossible. But being a finalist, that alone would put us in a new stratosphere. Anja looked at me from across our conference table. "This is your project to lead, Izzy," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Your design philosophy is perfect for this. Bold, sustainable, humane-centric. This is the one." A familiar fire ignited in my chest, the one I thought had been extinguished all those years ago. This was the ultimate challenge, the kind of project I used to dream about. For the next 2 months, my life became the Nexus Corp proposal. My team and I worked around the clock. We slept in the office, fueled by caffeine and the thrilling energy of creation. I felt alive, every cell in my body humming with purpose. We created a design that was, I knew in my bones, revolutionary. It was the best work I had ever done. We submitted the proposal and waited. Weeks later, the news came. We had made the shortlist. We were one of 3 firms invited to Berlin to present our final design to the Nexus Corp executive board. The feeling was euphoric. We were the underdog, the small firm that had fought its way to the top. The day before we were set to fly out, Anja handed me the final meeting agenda. It listed the names of the Nexus Corp executive committee, who would be making the final decision. I scanned the list of German and American names, my mind already rehearsing my opening remarks. And then I saw it. The 4th name down. The head of European development, recently transferred from the Asia-Pacific division to oversee this project, Daniel Miller. The name leaped off the page, an inkblot explosion that splattered across my carefully constructed piece. I felt the blood drain from my face. The conference room, my beautiful office, the blueprints on the wall, it all seemed to warp and recede. He wasn't in Singapore, he was here. And he was the man I would have to pitch my life's work to. Anja saw my expression and instantly knew. She had heard the condensed, clinical version of my story years ago. She slid the paper out of my trembling hand. "Izzy," she said softly, "you don't have to do this. I can lead the presentation." My first instinct was to say yes, to run, to let her handle it. The idea of standing in a room with him again, of having him hold my professional fate in his hands, was nauseating. It felt like a cruel joke orchestrated by the universe. A final test I did not want to take. To be judged by the man whose judgment had already cost me 5 years of my life was a special kind of hell. He could kill my project with a single word, erase this part of my life as easily as he had erased the last. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I paced my apartment, the ghost of my past self whispering in my ear. He has all the power. He'll crush you. He'll do it out of spite, or worse, out of pity. But then, another voice pushed through. The voice of the woman I was now. The partner of Stadler and Voss. The architect who had clawed her way back from nothing. I thought about the first bridge I ever designed. I thought about the building I was currently designing, a structure of strength and light. I had let him dismantle my life once because I thought I had to, for the sake of us to back down now, to let his presence dictate the trajectory of my career again, would be the ultimate betrayal not of him, but of myself. It would mean that after all these years, he still had control. I walked into Anja's office the next morning, my eyes clear and my resolve set like concrete. I'm leading the presentation, I said. This is my design. I will present it. Anja smiled, a look of fierce pride in her eyes. I knew you would, she said. Walking into the Nexus Corp boardroom in Berlin felt like entering a Roman Colosseum. It was a vast, sterile space, all glass and brushed steel. And there he was, at the center of the long table. He looked older. He wore his success like an expensive, well-tailored suit. His hair was shorter, with distinguished flecks of gray at the temples. He looked up as my team and I entered, and his eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of shock, of disbelief, quickly masked by a veneer of cool professionalism. But I saw it. He hadn't known. My name, Isabel Voss, was different enough from Isabel Miller that it hadn't registered. I gave a brief, polite nod, my face a neutral mask, and set up my presentation. I didn't look at him again. I addressed the entire board, my voice clear and steady. For the next hour, I poured every ounce of my passion and expertise into my presentation. I spoke about foundations, about structural integrity, about creating spaces that were not only beautiful but honest. I spoke about how every element must support the whole, without sacrificing its own purpose and identity. The subtext was so thick, so personal, I could feel it resonating in the room, even if I was the only one who understood it. I was not just presenting a building. I was presenting the manifesto of my own rebirth. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, followed by a ripple of applause. The CEO was impressed. The questions were insightful. I answered them with a confidence that felt unshakable. Throughout it all, Daniel was silent, his face unreadable. After the formal Q&A as we were packing up, he approached me. Isabel, he said, his voice low. Can I have a word? Anja gave me a questioning look. I nodded. This was the last piece of the puzzle. We stood in a small alcove overlooking the Berlin skyline. Your design is brilliant, he said. He looked genuinely stunned. I always knew you had it in you. The condescension in that old, familiar phrase, the implication that my talent was something he had discovered and approved of, was so profound it was almost funny. The old me would have shrunk. The new me just smiled, a small, polite, and utterly dismissive smile. Thank you, Daniel, I said, my voice cool and even. My work speaks for itself. Izzy? I'm sorry, he stammered, for the first time looking genuinely uncomfortable. For everything. What I did was unforgivable. I was a different man then. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction from his apology. It was like looking at a stranger whose story I had once read. He was irrelevant. The power he held was an illusion. Yes, it was unforgivable, I said simply. But honestly, Daniel, my life is not defined by what you did to me. It's defined by what I did for myself after you left. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to my team. I turned and walked away without looking back, leaving him standing alone with his apology and his obsolete power. The flight home was tense. We didn't know if we had one. But as I looked out the window at the clouds, I realized something profound. It didn't matter. By facing him, by presenting my work with unapologetic confidence, by standing in my own power and refusing to be diminished by his presence, I had already won the only victory that mattered. He was no longer a ghost that could haunt me. He was just a man in a boardroom. 2 weeks later, the call came. The CEO of Nexus Corp was on the line. They had made their decision. We won. Our firm, Stadler and Voss, had won the Nexus Corp headquarters project. The celebration in our office was euphoric. But later that night, I drove out to the empty field where the new headquarters would be built. I stood there in the darkness, under the stars, with the blueprints for my future clutched in my hand. The victory wasn't sweet because I had beaten Daniel. It was sweet because my work had won. My vision. My resilience. He hadn't just asked me to give up my career. He'd asked me to give up myself. And for a time, I had. But I had fought my way back, not to the woman I was before, but to someone stronger. Someone whose foundations were built on her own bedrock of talent and grit. I had lost a husband, but I had gained an empire of my own making. And as I looked out at the dark earth, I could already see it rising.